The Senate Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee will please come to order. Today we are having the second of two hearings on reauthorizing 4 Food and Drug Administration user fee programs. I will have an opening statement followed by Ranking Member Burr, and then we will introduce our witnesses. After the witnesses give their testimony, senators will each have 5 minutes for a round of questions. And while we're unable to have this hearing fully open to the public or media for in-person attendance, live video is available on our committee website at help.senate.gov. And if you are in need of accommodations, including closed captioning, you can reach out to the committee, the Office of Congressional Accessibility Service. Before we discuss the importance of the user fee programs to FDA's drug and device work, recent reporting has put a spotlight on issues with the FDA's food safety and nutrition efforts, including several that have frustrated me for a long time. And while some important steps on nutrition and safety have been stalled for years, we've also seen more recent threats met with a frustratingly slow response, like arsenic and other heavy metals in baby food, or contaminated infant formula, which FDA first received complaints about last September, but was only recalled earlier this year. So I'm going to keep pressing for answers from FDA leadership on how they will end the pattern of delay and dysfunction here, because FDA's mission when it comes to ensuring our food is safe and healthy is too important to be on the agency's back burner. Because people in Washington State and across the country depend on the FDA doing its job quickly and carefully every single day in more ways than even they realize. Whether they are getting a meal or a prescription or an ultrasound or almost anything in between, they are putting the well-being of themselves and their families in FDA's hands. We owe it to them to make sure the FDA has everything it needs and is doing everything it can to live up to that huge responsibility. And the user fee programs have an important role to play when it comes to FDA's work ensuring the safety and effectiveness of medical products families rely on to stay healthy. These programs make sure that as FDA gets more new drugs or devices to consider for approval, and as it gets more critical work to do, it also gets more resources to support that work. Given the importance of these programs for keeping families safe, Congress has regularly reauthorized them in a bipartisan way, and I'm glad to be working with Senator Burr and our colleagues on this committee to get this done once again in a timely manner. Because it should be unthinkable that after 2 years, when FDA's work has become more important than ever, we would fail to get this done or force the agency to send pink slips. But it should also be unthinkable that we would let this moment slip by without looking carefully at what is and is not working at FDA. And that starts with looking back at this pandemic, from FDA's incredible work to quickly review and approve safe, effective vaccines, to the challenges it faced like misinformation and political interference from the previous administration, to other issues we saw like the constant struggle with testing shortages, the hydroxychloroquine debacle, and the ongoing frustration parents are dealing with because of unclear timelines for vaccines for young children, which I'm expecting to hear answers about at today's hearing. We need to learn from these challenges, something Senator Burr and I have already started to work on in our Prevent Pandemics Act, but we need to look beyond this pandemic as well, because there are countless issues right now that families in Washington State are struggling with, but which FDA is struggling to address. We have to make sure the approval process works for families, not just pharmaceutical companies' bottom lines, and that patients are having their voices heard and concerns addressed by FDA. That means better steps to ensure drugs work for everyone, such as increased diversity in clinical trials and pediatric drug research. It means ensuring the accelerated approval pathway benefits patients. And it absolutely means lowering drug costs that have been skyrocketing for years and leaving patients with impossible choices, which is why I want to cap insulin costs at $35 a month. It's also why I want to take steps so FDA can do more to bring down barriers that block cheaper generics and biosimilars from getting to market and stop pharmaceutical companies who game the FDA system to block competition from cheaper drugs. I also want FDA to make good on the promise of a law we worked in this committee to pass half a decade ago, and finally let hearing aids be sold over the counter and at lower cost to millions of people. There's no good reason we are still waiting for FDA to implement this step and save millions of people thousands of dollars. We also need to be looking at what more we can do to address substance use disorders and the opioid crisis, as overdose deaths keep setting record highs, and fentanyl is wreaking havoc in our communities. And while there's clearly more we can do to strengthen FDA's oversight of drugs and devices, there's also an alarming number of products that currently get no meaningful oversight. When it comes to cosmetics, we have discovered known carcinogens like asbestos and formaldehyde in baby powder, children's makeup kits, and hair products. And when it comes to dietary supplements, people across the country are faced with a shelf full of products that make health claims but lack oversight. FDA does not have the authority to collect basic information about these products or even to know what is on the market. People buy, use, and entrust their health to these items every day, and they deserve to know these products are safe, vetted, and subject to careful FDA oversight. So I hope we'll be able to make progress on all of these issues and more as we work to reauthorize the user fee programs. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about these challenges. Thank you for being here, and to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to address them in a bipartisan way. And as we look at how to support FDA's work, I hope we can also make progress soon on the urgently needed funding for our COVID response. We've got to get that done because families are counting on us to provide communities the tests, treatments, and vaccines they need to keep people healthy, protect our hard-won progress against this pandemic, and keep our country ready for whatever comes next. With that, I will turn it over to Ranking Member Burr for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And if I could take a point of personal privilege for a moment, I want to reflect on the passing of Senator Orrin Hatch. When the Reagan Revolution came to the Senate, Orrin Hatch became the committee's chair. He was a remarkable senator and a good friend to many of us on this committee. His work in this committee and others is something we should all be proud of. Without Orrin, we wouldn't have a generic drug industry. Think of how many lives have been saved because of that and how many billions have been saved with lower-cost drugs. He was also the author of the Americans with Disabilities Act, helping improve the lives of millions of Americans with disabilities, giving them opportunities and freedoms to live quality lives. The list of what he accomplished could go on and on. I'm saddened by his passing, and my heart and prayers go out to his beloved Elaine and their children and to his friends and the staff who worked for him, because I know they're hurting today as well. I thank the chair. Madam Chairman, I thank you for holding this second hearing today on FDA's user fee program and for working with my staff and me on policies that have the potential to go along with the legislation as we reauthorize them. The user fee reauthorization provides one of those rare opportunities in Congress for true bipartisanship and should be seen as a time to take a hard look at the policies that affect the daily lives of the American people. I'd bet that each person watching or participating in this hearing has already used several products today that are regulated by the FDA. That's why it's so important for the agency to keep pace with the advancements in these products that they regulate. If today's hearing had a theme, it would be accountability. You're here today to be held accountable to the Congress and to the American people. During COVID-19 pandemic, FDA leveraged its authorities and responded swiftly to help private sector partners develop and bring tests, treatments, and vaccines to the American people in record time. I was thrilled that the agency embraced the letter and, more importantly, the spirit of the law. But this seems to be the exception, reserved for emergencies and not the rule. COVID was a crisis, and you acted fast. But a diagnosis of cancer or Alzheimer's is also a crisis for families facing that news day in and day out. The agency needs to apply practices it used during COVID's response to its everyday operations to help speed not only the review of products, but their development as well. Why shouldn't we expect you to treat more things with the same urgency you applied to the pandemic? As we learned during the pandemic, FDA has a fractured framework for clinical tests. It has blind spots where some of the most important tests for patients and their doctors are concerned, like genetic tests. I want to work on updating FDA's regulation of diagnostic tests, and in working with the chair to update the regulations of other products like cosmetics and dietary supplements. I'm glad the chair is interested in rolling up her sleeves and joining with me on this. But there's an elephant in the room. The FDA has a responsibility to meet the terms of the commitments it's made under the user fee programs. Based on my evaluation, you've not fully delivered. During the last 2 decades, I've legislated major reforms at FDA across almost all of its programs. The 1997 user fee bill was my bill, FDAMA. It brought needed reforms to streamline drug review, established risk-based regulation of medical devices, and required the agency to be more flexible with types of evidence it considered for the products it regulates. In 2010, I worked with Senator Judd Gregg, Ted Kennedy, Lamar Alexander, and others to write the Food Safety Modernization Act, aimed at reducing foodborne illnesses and deaths and modernizing the food safety programs at the agency. In 2012, I worked with Tom Coburn to hold FDA more accountable, reduce product review times, address cultural changes at the agency to reinforce that review speed matters, especially to patients with a ticking clock. In 2013, this committee worked to provide regulatory certainty for compounded drugs, and I worked to ensure the agency had the track and trace authorities it needed to improve its ability to detect unsafe counterfeit medicines. However, I've also been the roadblock to many proposals when I feared that the agency was not ready for the role Congress wanted it to play or the mission was at risk. I've also objected to giving FDA new and expanded authorities that, quite frankly, I didn't think they should have, especially when FDA fails to address my concerns about accountability. I fought against the passage of the 2009 tobacco law because I knew the FDA didn't have what it takes to regulate these products. Safe and effective applies everywhere in the FDA except CTP. It should have been at ATF all along. 13 years and more than $7.5 billion, and it's authorized only one vapor product. Only one. Only one potentially less harmful alternative for lifelong smokers. I held the 2012 user fee bill on the Senate floor and spoke for hours to run through my longstanding concerns with the user fee programs and the FDA's posture that a user fee bill could be dropped in the lap of the United States Senate and passed without question. I've fought to uphold FDA's gold standard of review, including when other agencies thought they could perform FDA's function better. I deeply value and believe in the mission of the Food and Drug Administration, which is why the commitments that FDA makes are so important and the goals it misses are so concerning. The user fee legislation that will come before this committee for a vote in just a few weeks must hold the FDA accountable for its actions and its inactions. Accountability is not an option. You don't get to set goals you know you can't meet and pretend that's accountability. Each of the new agreements this committee is evaluating reflect major new commitments: more money, more staff, more government. But what we do about previous commitments that went or remain, what do we do with commitments that went or remain unfulfilled? For the drugs program, in fiscal year 2019 and 20, FDA missed 12 out of the 14 user fee goals in the new drug program related to product development meetings with sponsors, leaving the innovators in limbo. Meeting 2 of 14 goals is a 15% success rate. I believe that would pretty much be an F by anybody's grading curve. For the Biosimilars program in fiscal year 2020, FDA only reviewed 50% of the applications on time, and FDA missed 7 out of 15 goals related to biosimilar products development meeting. I'm quoting you the facts here of things that you committed to do, not Congress imposed on you. 50% of 7 out of 15, that'd also be an F under anybody's grading. And for the medical device program, not only will FDA be 3 months late in finalizing the agreement, it took so long because you refused to acknowledge that the agency didn't meet all of its goals from the last round. And now FDA wants double the money for mediocre performance improvements and for certain devices, longer review times. But the missed commitments don't stop there. Missing explanations on deficiency letters, a carryover balance the size of a whole year of user fee, and the failure to finalize guidance critical to some of the most important advanced products in the field. More money, lower expectations of accountability, no accountability for past failures. Add on top of this a new costly program aimed at shepherding certain devices through the review process for which FDA has zero clear deliverables, when you already essentially have this authority because I've already given it to you. And you expect Congress to rubber stamp these agreements. My friends, I don't think so. After 2 transformative, challenging years at FDA, I know you can do better. The American people saw you do better. And you have an opportunity today to convince me that the agency is on the right track for patients. The more you use the user fee process to bully dollars out of an industry, holding them hostage in the negotiating room, the less accountable FDA is to the American people and their elected representatives, period. American patients deserve user fee programs that bring medicines to them on time, that keep pace with technology, that reduce the time and cost of development and treatment, and that do not grow just to put more government between patients and cures. I come to this process as a good faith partner to my colleagues and as a long-standing advocate of the FDA, but not as a doormat. This committee has never shied away from difficult FDA policy discussions. I promise this process will be thorough and critical so that the agency can rise to the challenge of the next generation of scientific advancements to improve the lives of the American people. I know you can do it. And with just a little more accountability added to these programs, I'm optimistic that my colleagues and I will be able to get these agreements signed into law. But if there's not more accountability, I see no reason why I shouldn't stand in the way. Madam Chairman, I thank you.
Thank you, Senator Burr, and thank you for beginning with a tribute to Senator Orrin Hatch. Those of us who served with him remember his tremendous contributions to this committee, to this country, to the people of America, and my condolences as well go to his family, his friends, his staff, and everyone who knew him and didn't know him, because his legacy will live on. So thank you for that. I will now introduce today's witnesses. Our first witness today is Dr. Patricia Cavazzoni. She is director of FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. We will also be hearing from Dr. Peter Marks. He is the director of the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. And our final witness is Dr. Jeffrey Shuren. He's the director of the Center for Devices and Radiological Health. Thank you all for being here with us today to share your time and expertise, and I look forward to hearing from each of you. And Dr. Cavazzoni will begin with your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member Burr, and members of the committee. I am Dr. Patricia Cavazzoni, Director of the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research at the FDA. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today, along with my colleagues Dr. Marks and Dr. Shuren, to discuss reauthorization of the user fee programs covering brand name drugs, generic drugs, biosimilars, and devices. We appreciate the efforts of Congress and this committee in particular in reauthorizing these programs in previous cycles and look forward to continuing our partnership this year. As Dr. Marks will speak about Padufa in his testimony, I will focus my opening remarks on the Generic Drug User Fee Program, or GDUFA, and the Biosimilar Drug User Fee Program, or BASUFA. These programs have allowed FDA to provide access to affordable, high-quality medicines to millions of Americans who otherwise couldn't afford them. Since its creation more than 10 years ago, GDUFA has allowed the agency to approve thousands of generic medicines, resulting in significant cost saving for consumers. By some accounts, generic drugs saved the U.S. healthcare system more than $2 trillion over that period. Patients confident that generic drugs will work the same as brand products and can be freely substituted is the foundation for the access and savings that generics have produced for the healthcare system. We intend to build on this success by approving more drugs in a single round of review, including complex generics with little or no competition. With more generic drugs on the market, there is a corresponding increase in the need for FDA advice over the life cycle of these products. Indeed, we see a steady increase in generic drug applications with post-approval actions. In addition, as brand name drugs become increasingly sophisticated and harder to manufacture, the generic program faces increased demand to keep up with innovation. Padufa 3 will introduce new measures that allow for earlier approvals and will ensure that the agency has the appropriate staff expertise to deliver on our goals year after year. Let me now turn to the Biosimilar User Fee Program, or BSUFA. The abbreviated biosimilar approval pathway saves the developers time and resources, thus encouraging competition and potentially lowering healthcare costs. Since the enactment of BSUFA 2 5 years ago, the number of approved biosimilar products has grown from 5 to 35 today, including an interchangeable insulin product. BSUFA 3 proposes to retain the majority of existing review performance goals, with changes to some of the meetings between FDA and developers to improve communications. With a growing portfolio of approved biosimilar products, the proposal seeks to expedite the review of new indications or other changes after the initial approval. Finally, BSUFA 3 doubles down on efforts to advance the development of interchangeable products that may be switched at the pharmacy like generic drugs, resulting in even greater access to lower-cost biosimilars. To close, I cannot emphasize enough the critical importance of reauthorizing these 3 user fee programs. Without them, FDA's medical product programs, which have allowed for hundreds of treatments and cures for life-threatening diseases, would not exist as they are today. Padufa's revolutionary impact on innovation and the flow of new medicines is matched by Padufa's impact in making what might otherwise be thousands of unaffordable drugs accessible to millions of Americans. As the BSUFA program continues to grow, we anticipate that it will complement Padufa by expanding the availability of even more high-quality, affordable medicines for all those who need them. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Dr. Marks?
Chair Murray, Ranking Member Burr, and members of the committee, I'm Peter Marks, Director of the Center of Biologics Evaluation and Research at the Food and Drug Administration. I'm pleased to be here today with my colleagues to discuss the reauthorization of the medical product user fee programs. For my portion of the testimony, I'll focus on the Prescription Drug User Fee Program, or Padufa. Both CBER and CDER will implement the commitments contained in the Padufa commitment letter, which we'll refer to as Padufa 7. So know that while I'm presenting the elements of the Padufa 7 letter, both Dr. Cavazzoni and I share the responsibility for oversight of the program. Since first enacted 30 years ago, Padufa has revolutionized the United States drug approval process. It's reversed the lag in drug approvals that prompted its creation, providing Americans with more timely access to safe and effective medical products. Today, almost 2/3 of new active substances approved globally are first launched in the United States. It's not an understatement to say that there are many people with us today who would not be here without the program, which has dramatically reshaped drug development and approval in the United States, bringing potentially life-saving medical therapies to patients in a much more timely manner. Though it began with a general focus on shortening review times, through successive 5-year Padufa reauthorizations, program enhancements have evolved and expanded significantly. Enhanced interactions give us the opportunity to provide more guidance to sponsors, improving the potential for first-cycle approvals and getting safe and effective drugs to patients sooner. These interactions also enable sponsors to incorporate the advances in regulatory science into their development programs, expediting drug development and facilitating timely regulatory interactions and decisions. Reauthorization of Padufa will enable the agency to collect fees to support the review of new innovative drugs. The Padufa 7 commitment letter's focus includes the following categories. Among others, it'll enhance CBER's support for the development, review, and approval of cell and gene therapy products and new allergenic extract products, advance applied scientific research to expedite drug development. It will continue the enhancement and modernization of the drug safety system, advance the utilization of innovative manufacturing technologies, and improve FDA's hiring and retention of key scientific and technical talent. As the Director of CBER, I'd like to direct your attention for a moment to the Padufa 7 commitment focused on new enhancement to CBER's support for the development, review, and approval of cell and gene therapy products and new allergenic extract products. FDA has experienced exponential growth in cellular and gene therapy submissions over the past 7 years, with close to 2,000 active development programs. We have seen a sustained increase in development program activities, including an 85% increase in investigation of new drug applications and a 158% increase in formal meeting requests. A number of these programs, such as Regenerative Medicine Advanced Therapy, or RMAT designation, which was enacted by Congress as part of the 21st Century Cures Act, have the potential to bring new therapies to meet unmet medical needs for serious and life-threatening conditions. Since December 2016, 72 of 187 requests that have received RMAT designation with 3 of these designated products having received approval in 2021. These include 2 allogeneic cellular products, 1 for children with a rare immune disorder, 1 for wound healing, and a CAR T-cell therapy for patients with a kind of cancer, B-cell lymphoma. To meet the demands of the rapidly expanding cell and gene therapy portfolio, Padufa 7 proposes new enhancements to CBER's capacity. The proposal will allow the agency to produce multiple guidances, to host public meetings to examine new technologies and approaches, and to better understand patient perspectives on gene therapy products, and to conduct public outreach to facilitate product development and approval. New allergenic extract products also will be included in Padufa 7, and the program will provide needed resources to facilitate the development and approval of new medical products critical for the diagnosis and treatment of allergies, including serious food allergies. The enhancements to cell and gene therapy and allergenics are just 2 examples of the important enhancements proposed under Padufa 7, and we'll be happy to answer questions regarding the others. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Dr. Schern?
Chair Murray, Ranking Member Burr, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the 5th reauthorization of Padufa. The investments made in previous Padufa reauthorizations have paid dividends as we continue to see an increasing number of innovators bring their devices to the U.S. first and a more robust pipeline of innovative technologies. I want you to know that I personally regret that we missed the statutory deadline to deliver our recommendations to Congress, an obligation that I and the entire agency take seriously. I'm pleased to report, however, that the long deliberations have ultimately produced a strong, thoughtful agreement on recommendations to Congress that, if enacted, will continue to advance medical device innovation while increasing accountability for the program and maintaining the FDA's standards to protect patients. CDRH continued to meet and exceed most performance goals through the first half of Padufa 4. However, we missed some goals later on. During this time, we saw a rise in our workload for which we were not fully funded. For example, so far during Padufa 4, we received over 3,000 more pre-submissions than we were resourced to review. And the number of breakthrough device designations we've granted has increased by almost 60%. Medical devices have and continue to be increasingly more complex, and the review of their pre-market submissions more resource-intensive. While the number of submissions we receive annually has increased as well, and we expect these trends to continue. And then COVID hit. It pushed us into a continuous all-hands-on-deck operation in order to facilitate the development and availability of pandemic-related medical devices. CDRH has received over 8,000 emergency use and pre-EUA requests, and we're still receiving about 120 of these submissions a month. We've granted emergency use or full marketing authorization to nearly 2,300 medical devices for COVID-19, including over 460 tests and self-collection kits. This has truly been a perfect storm that my center has been battling against for over 2 years. Moreover, our efforts to grant EUAs are not covered under the scope of Padufa, and they don't count towards outperformance. On the other hand, the magnitude of the emergency response inevitably led to a backlog and delayed review times, and we fell short on some of our Padufa 4 goals. We know this has had a great impact on companies across the country. This is why we have been transparent, communicating about impacts publicly and regularly, and we have worked hard to address delays for COVID and non-COVID devices through hiring more staff and contractors, reallocating current staff, and changing policy, procedure, and practice, with many of my staff burning the midnight oil and burning out in the process. We greatly appreciate the support from Congress, particularly in the form of supplemental funding. And we've now turned the corner. We've already reduced the backlog of non-COVID device submissions by 45%, and we're targeting to have most of the center back to normal operations by later this year. Despite these challenges during the Padufa 4, we continue to authorize record numbers of novel devices, over 100 a year, even during the pandemic, and we granted almost 600 breakthrough device designations, with most designations going to small startup companies. Even while falling short of some goals and facing our most challenging years to date, we have continued to provide value to innovators and to patients. The Padufa 5 proposal takes important steps to address resource gaps that began to show before COVID-19 and to support improved performance. It also features many new accountability mechanisms, one of which is for add-on payments, under which FDA would receive additional user fees if it meets specified goals. These additional funds come with even more ambitious goals for the later years of Padufa 5. The agreement includes a new voluntary pilot, TAP, to provide earlier, more frequent, and more strategic engagement with sponsors of breakthrough designated devices and those included in the Safer Technologies program to speed device development, and will be tracking over half a dozen metrics for devices in the pilot to make sure that TAP provides a return on investment. The initiative is another way we're continuing to incorporate lessons learned from the pandemic, where we saw how engaging with sponsors through the pre-EUA process to problem solve and answer their questions in real or near real time was critical for facilitating important technologies coming to market quickly and safely. The Padufa 5 proposal would also support advancing the patient perspective in regulatory decisions, expanding the use of consensus standards, leveraging real-world evidence for regulatory decision-making, and advancing global harmonization, among other priorities. We appreciate Congress's patience and support. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you very much to all of you. We will now begin a round of 5-minute questions, and I again ask my colleagues keep track of the clock and stay within those 5 minutes. Dr. Marks, I want to start with you. Families are still waiting for a COVID vaccine for children under the age of 5, and this week there were reports that they may be waiting till June. Throughout my state, I have had parents talking to me about this. They're frustrated, they're confused, and I am too, and they really do deserve some clarity on this. So for parents back in my home of Washington State, across the country, can you tell us when you expect a COVID-19 vaccine for young children and why it's taking so long and what we need to know in the meantime to keep children safe?
Thank you, Chair. Once we have a fully complete emergency use application, we'll move quickly without sacrificing our standards to finish our evaluation of COVID-19 vaccines for children under 5 years of age. It's one of our highest priorities, and we care very deeply about the health and well-being of children. But simply making a vaccine available doesn't matter if parents don't get their kids vaccinated. So it's critically important that we have the proper evaluation so that parents will have trust in any vaccines that we authorize. As we work to complete our reviews, we'll bring the vaccines before our independent advisors to have a discussion of the data. And if we authorize the vaccines in young children, parents will be able to have access to the information they need to be confident in making their decisions on vaccination. So we are deeply committed to getting a safe and effective COVID-19 available for all children, and we'll make sure we get the job done and get it done correctly. In the next week, we'll make public a tentative timeline for advisory committee meetings for several expected applications. But just remember that we can't actually finish our reviews until we actually have complete applications in the FDA.
So we don't have complete applications? Is that why this is taking so long?
Unfortunately, we can't comment publicly on the state of this, but I would direct you to the fact that the manufacturers generally will make an announcement when they have a full and complete application in with us for emergency use. But you can surmise what the situation is because we will proceed with all due speed once we have complete applications. Some of these are complicated because they are relatively larger, covering larger swaths of the pediatric population than others.
Okay. Dr. Cavazzoni, when it comes to opioids, we have seen how FDA failures in the past have really contributed to a nationwide crisis, and that continues to tragically grow for families and communities across the country. Last year alone, we lost over 100,000 people to drug overdoses. That's a heartbreaking record. And more of these deaths are due to fentanyl. Fentanyl overdose deaths in my home state of Washington have increased tenfold in the past 6 years, which is a stunning increase. And we really do need an all-hands-on-deck effort to do everything possible to get our handle on this problem and save lives. And that includes FDA taking decisive action to respond to the fentanyl crisis. FDA was too slow and too hesitant to address this in the past, and I think every member of this committee really believes we need to be more aggressive and dynamic steps need to be taken now and going forward. So while you're here, I want to ask you, what is FDA doing to aggressively work with federal partners to address the use of illicit fentanyl-related substances and expand access to high-quality treatments for opioid use disorder and overdose reversal drugs that can save lives like naloxone?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The efforts to fight the opioid epidemic are really need to FDA as well as all our federal partners, because it's a very complicated situation. And we are redoubling our efforts when it comes to fighting the opioid epidemic, looking at all potential tools that we have. And for instance, very recently we have issued a federal register notice indicating that we are considering including mail-back envelopes with prescriptions as part of the opioid REMS. We're also very, very focused on expanding the access of naloxone, and in particular OTC naloxone. We understand the need. We stand ready to work with manufacturers to expedite the review of these products so that we make opioid reversal agents more broadly available to the American people.
Okay, thank you. And my time is expired. I do have additional questions, but I will turn to Senator Burr.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Dr. Cavazzoni, in the last Padufa agreement, FDA committed to 230 new hires by fiscal year 2022. According to the FDA's performance report for fiscal 2021, it's hired 212 of those new hires. Yet there are currently a total of 260 Padufa-funded vacancies across the Drugs and Biologics Center. Here's my question. How can the FDA say that it's met its hiring commitments with so many underlying vacancies in the Padufa program? And why does FDA not account for net employment?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. When we look at the vacancies that we have in place, it's important that we put them within context of our total number of staff in the user fee program. And so our current vacancies represent approximately 7 to 8% of our total staff. And this is not an unexpected rate of vacancy or attrition in large organizations. It's also important to keep in mind that when an employee leaves, we immediately start the process to backfill that position. And so if you look behind those vacancies, they have activities behind them to bring them on board. We are overall on track to meet our hiring commitments by the end of the cycle. And yes, we are asking for additional personnel as part of the next authorization cycle. And it is important to keep in mind that the additional personnel are really meant to support the incremental activities and commitments that we have negotiated with industry, and that the current personnel, including those backfill vacancies, are really there to meet our current commitments. And we work very, very fast to try to backfill those open vacancies, utilizing the tools that Congress have given us, for example, 21st Century Cure hiring authority, which has been very, very helpful to us.
I think it has been helpful. And Dr. Cavazzoni, I've been here for 28 years. but I still don't buy into the belief that if you've hired 212 people under the commitment, but you have 260 vacancy, I, as an applicant, should feel good about that. That tells me that there are less people working an application, working the entire division. So maybe we'll have a disagreement there, but I certainly understand why the industry looks at this and says, well, technically you may have reached your goal, but if you actually have less people working in the Padufa than you did when we started, so it's a net loss. Dr. Shuren, the pandemic highlighted the fragmented approach for our country takes to diagnostic test regulations. I've been working for more than 3 years together with a new proposal, the VALID Act, to reform the way we regulate tests and encourage innovation in the field. Do you agree that our approach to clinical tests needs to be reformed?
I do. We are supporters, and first of all, I just want to thank you and Chair Murray for your leadership on trying to drive diagnostic reform. And we're very supportive of having reform, working with you on a final product. What that has to be, though, is to make sure that it covers all tests. Doctors and patients don't care who makes your test, they just care that your test works.
Jeff, you said a minute ago we're trying to be transparent. So let me just be candid. By law, meeting minutes for Padufa negotiations are required to be posted publicly before the agreement is transmitted to Congress. Today, there are no meeting minutes from any meeting since February of this year. You posted minutes for 9 meetings between September and February over the weekend. We're still missing the minutes from 7 meetings. Congress and the imperative, well, will you commit to publish 100% of the meeting minutes before finalizing the commitment letter?
Yes, we're hoping to have all the meeting minutes through March 7th posted today.
Why has that been so difficult? Just out of curiosity.
Out of curiosity, you know what? It is a negotiation in and of itself with the industry parties. And you've seen how those negotiations go, a lot of diverse opinions. And the big focus was trying to get the deal done, get the meetings afterwards. We agree with you. It's hard for you to make informed decisions without those meeting minutes present. And I think we and industry both struggled with the resources available with COVID as well. So we see this as an unusual circumstance, and we know this is not the way going forward. We will have the rest of the meeting minutes out by the end of this week, and we are targeting to have the final package to you all by the end of next week.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Hassan.
Well, I want to thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Burr, for having this hearing, and thank you for the witnesses for being here today. Dr. Cavazzoni, last summer I led a bipartisan letter to the FDA raising concerns about the apparent conflicts of interest surrounding the consulting firm Mckinsey. The firm worked for the agency on opioid-related projects while also simultaneously working for opioid manufacturers like Purdue Pharma. The FDA's response to the letter indicated that Mckinsey failed to disclose any potential conflicts of interest when applying for FDA contracts. And earlier this month, Chair Murray and I led a letter asking the HHS Inspector General to investigate further. What actions is the FDA now taking against Mckinsey based on the firm's failures to disclose apparent conflicts of interest? For example, is the FDA suspending current and future contracts with Mckinsey and referring this case to the Department of Justice for potential violations of the False Claims Act?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. It is very important to establish that while Mckinsey have worked with FDA under contracts over several years, their work did not entail specific regulatory work or scientific review work pertaining to products or product classes.
But my question is, what are you all doing to make sure that we don't come to a place like this again, and to hold Mckinsey accountable for failure to disclose what is an apparent conflict of interest?
So FDA follows U.S. government contracting rules, and those rules require contractors to disclose any conflict of interest, and we expect contractors to do so. This is the framework under which we operate, and we will continue to set those expectations.
So I'm going to follow up with you additionally because I am still interested in wanting an answer to whether you're going to suspend contracts, current or future contracts with McKinsey, whether there is a case for referring this to DOJ, and I'll continue to follow up on the issue, including with the HHS inspector.
To orient you to that, the Center for Drugs currently does not have a contract with McKinsey, and across FDA, we anticipate that further contracts will not be issued pending the outcome of the investigations, and I can defer to my colleagues, Dr. Marks, to speak to CBER.
Well, I'm going to hold off on that because I have a few other questions and limited time, but I will follow up with you, Dr. Marks. I have another question, Dr. Cavazzoni. In the FDA's response to my original letter, the agency claimed that it first became aware that McKinsey had taken on opioid manufacturers as clients in early 2021. However, the New York Times reported on McKinsey's representation of Purdue Pharma in February 2019. Contracting databases show that from February 2019 to January 2021, McKinsey received more than $20 million in new contracts from the FDA. How did the FDA fail to notice McKinsey's apparent conflicts of interest until almost 2 years after they were public knowledge printed in the New York Times?
As I mentioned earlier, we rely on government contracting rules which set the expectations for contractors to disclose conflicts of interest. And it is also very important to highlight that the work that McKinsey did at FDA was about general process, concept of operations, organizational design, and did not entail direct involvement in product regulation or scientific review.
That may or may not be true, but the reality is that when somebody who is bragging to drug manufacturers that they know what questions to ask and have influence at the FDA, that should be of concern. And it strains credulity to think that nobody at the FDA involved with McKinsey between 2019 and 2021 had any idea that the company had major potential conflicts of interest based on news reports in major publications. How is the FDA adjusting its contracting processes going forward to ensure that it is aware of publicly reported information about apparent conflicts of interest with major companies to which it is awarding tens of millions of dollars in contracts?
As I indicated earlier, we follow contracting regulations that apply across the entire U.S. government, including other agencies, and we rely on contractors to follow those rules and to inform us of any conflicts of interest.
I appreciate that answer. I think it is not sufficient for us to rely on self-reporting anymore, and I look forward to working with members of committees on whether we should exclusively rely on self-reporting from contractors, given what we have seen from McKinsey. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Cassidy.
Dr. Cavazzoni, I've introduced legislation with Dr. Smith that would consolidate the process for FDA to make therapeutic equivalent determinations for 505(b)(2) new drug applications. What data does FDA need to make a therapeutic equivalent determination which is not otherwise included in the 505(b)(2) application?
Thank you, Senator. We are aware of that legislation, and we understand and agree with the importance of therapeutic equivalence evaluations as a means to allow a substitution of drugs at the pharmacy. The pathway that we have to generate data that supports a therapeutic equivalence application is the generic drug review pathway. It is really fit for purpose to provide that answer disclosure by the time, at the time an application is approved. Conversely, the 505(b)(2) pathway is really not set up to generate the data that by the end of the review of the application or even after the application has been reviewed would allow us to make a determination of therapeutic equivalence. Why? Because the review tools and the actual regulations are really not set up to yield those data by the time a 505(b)(2) application is reviewed. So we are concerned that requiring a proposal to require that therapeutic equivalence evaluation be done within the context of 505(b)(2) applications would be very difficult to implement under the current framework. And we are interested in better exploring any barriers in the generic drug review program that may make it more difficult for some of these applications to come through the generic program where we can make those determinations very efficiently.
Thank you. Either Dr. Cavazzoni or Dr. Marks, there's been a recent court ruling that's called into question some aspects of the Orphan Drug Act. Specifically, courts have determined FDA can only award orphan drug exclusivity for an entire condition as opposed to indications within a condition. Can you elaborate on how this change in the scope of orphan drug exclusivity would impact current and future patient access to generics and biosimilars?
Thanks, Senator, for that question. So that particular decision has particular implications on the development of drugs, particularly in the pediatric realm for pediatric rare diseases. With orphan drug exclusivity, one does not necessarily have to develop a drug for a pediatric population. With this decision now, in the past, there would be a separate population that could have been granted for the pediatric population, allowing development to occur both in the adult orphan population and in the pediatric orphan population. Now, with this, that pediatric place is blocked. We view that as a potential problem for the development of drugs for rare diseases, and we would very much look forward to working with Congress to try to find a solution to this issue.
Put a point on it working with Baldwin and Cassidy because we're the ones who have the bills. So just to say that, Madam Chair and Mr. Ranking Member. Dr. Shuren, Congress has previously directed that the FDA issue certificates to foreign governments for FDA-approved medical devices that are exported from an FDA-registered establishment outside of the U.S. However, instead of doing that, I'm told, in 2020, FDA established a new form of certificate known as the Certificate for Device Not Exported from the United States. And this is, as I understand it, explicitly says that the FDA has not, does not convey that it would be lawful to import the market or market the device in the United States. As the FDA is the gold standard, this is unnecessarily burdensome language, so it seems, and has caused confusion among manufacturers and foreign regulators. Congress asked you to do this, and you've not done it. Any comment on all this?
Well, certainly there are two different situations. The certificate for foreign government is where we have a device that's made in the U.S. that's then exported to another country. It's subject to requirements in the U.S. like oversight on the manufacturing, and so FDA is in a different position to provide assurances regarding that device. Under the new provision, these are devices that are made in another country and they're sent to a different country. They're not in the U.S. They're not subject to the U.S. requirements. The FDA hasn't overseen them. We can't make the same assurances, and we do not want to convey to a foreign government something that would be incorrect. That said, there may be ways to fix this. There are some members in the House who are interested in doing so. If there's interest in the Senate, we'd be interested in working with you or other members to go ahead and do that.
May I have a follow-up question? I am told, though, that these are devices manufactured in facilities, and these facilities export these devices into the United States. Presumably, that means the facility would then have been inspected by FDA. FDA does not allow devices to be imported unless they have inspected the facility. So have I been told incorrectly that FDA has not inspected these facilities and has not approved these devices for sale within the U.S.?
Well, for devices that are made overseas and they're not for the U.S. marketplace, we would not have reviewed.
That's not what I'm asking.
Yeah.
If there is a device from a facility and that facility is approved to send the device into the U.S., that same facility is sending the same device to another country. That's my understanding of the current circumstance, and that for which a certificate for foreign government was directed by Congress to be issued. Now, is my understanding of this situation incorrect?
If that device, though, sometimes when you deal with a device that's made on a different manufacturing line for another country, that goes on.
Again, I'm not saying that.
Right.
It is the same device brought to the U.S. that is then being sent to another country. And so same manufacturing line, same device, it's just going in two different directions. And I think that was Congress's intent.
And that is a point where we think we could deal with clarification and then allow for those circumstances.
And so your point is it's not clear in what Congress previously passed that has that specificity.
That has been my understanding, but I would be happy to get back to you on that.
Thank you. I yield. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Baldwin. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Rosen.
Well, thank you, Chair Murray, Ranking Member Burr, for holding this important hearing, for our witnesses, for your service participating today, and speaking with bills that, with partners. Senator Cassidy and I have quite a few bills, too. I'm going to talk about one of them right here, because as we've discussed previously, cyber attacks, of course, are a growing threat to our healthcare sector. And so Senator Cassidy and I have just introduced legislation that improves collaboration amongst agencies to bolster protections for the medical field. So as we work to strengthen protection for our health system, we must also provide protections for all the way down to these medical devices. So to address this, I'm working on additional legislation to ensure cybersecurity guidance for medical device manufacturers. We want that guidance to be up to date and nimble so that federal resources through CISA, they're easy to understand and easy to access for our healthcare providers. So Dr. Shuren, the current FDA guidance for medical device cybersecurity is from 2018. It's in the process of being updated. And with technology rapidly evolving, has the FDA considered updated guidance more frequently? And do you have the authority, the tools to update specific sections of the guidance that maybe have to change more often to protect medical devices from cyber attacks? Would it be helpful for you to coordinate with CISA?
Well, completely agree. This is an important topic, and it's not just about the security of medical devices. This really is about our national security. We have seen a rise in cybersecurity risks and incidents over the past few years. We've had to put out 11 communications on this, and we have folks who are intending to they may not be intending to go for the medical device. They're in fact intending to get to the network system to which the medical device connects. We recently updated the guidance that you talked about. It was based upon feedback we got on the 2018 guidance, as well as additional lessons learned. So that is currently out for public comment. We agree with you. We'd like to continue to keep that fresh because it's constantly changing. Two things would be very helpful. One is, and we have this in the budget proposal for this year, for 2023, funding for us, because we only have gotten, and we're thankful for this, $500,000 in our base to support medical device cybersecurity. That's it. So we have asked for $5 million. The other is authorities, because this is a place where we do not have the full authorities to assure that these devices are cyber safe. And if we don't, we're going to continue to have threats. We've already seen, because of ransomware, medical devices directly impacted and patient care directly impacted.
Well, I might suggest that you speak with CISA. They have some Shields Up program, other programs about good cyber hygiene for companies. It might be a place that you can direct folks, and as we work on getting.
We actually are strong partners with CISA. We also work with the National Security Council, the National Cyber Chief. The little money I got, I was able to hire someone. She's working there part-time. I took her. We work with the FBI. We work with all those. In fact, they depend upon us for the information on medical devices, which is why it's so important we have the expertise and the authorities to be able to do our part of the job so they can do their part of the job.
Wonderful, thank you. I'd like to move on and talk about UNLV and University of Nevada at Las Vegas, University of Nevada, Reno. They both participate in network funded in the NIH to enhance translational research. And so UNLV serves as a host institution to advance research in Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and reducing health disparities. And UNR has done great work in a wide range of research areas, including cancer and diabetes. And we know that translational research, bridging the lab concept to impacting patients' lives, is an area that, of course, we must continue to strengthen. And so the research is happening at lots of universities, not just UNLV and UNR. It's critical to the pipeline of new treatments and cures. So, Dr. Cavazzoni, does the FDA currently provide outreach or learning opportunities for early career researchers to better understand the regulatory process, what could help advance their work to the next level, such as a spin-off company, and how can the FDA provide greater support to university research collaborations like these?
Thank you for the question. We do a lot of outreach and have partnerships with the academic community, and we view it as really an essential part of our job, particularly when it comes to translational research, because that is research that will allow us, will accelerate drug development in areas of unmet medical need by identifying new biological targets, and also help us understand potential surrogate markers of diseases that might allow us to use the great tools that Congress has given us, such as accelerated approval, expedited pathways, to accelerate the delivery of drugs in areas such as neuroscience, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and so on. So we view it as a very important part of our job.
Thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to associate myself with Senator Cassidy's earlier comments relating to the catalyst decision. And I know that I share a concern with many members of the committee about the ways in which drug companies can exploit loopholes in our existing laws, and I think catalyst opens up another opportunity. We are obviously looking at reauthorization and would love to see our legislation that I'm developing with Dr. Cassidy as an amendment in that forthcoming package. I wonder if Dr. Cavazzoni, if you could expand upon the potential impacts of this decision in the Catalyst case on patients, and what the general concerns are at FDA about addressing drug development for rare diseases.
Thank you, Senator. We share the concern and want to work with Congress to find solutions. The catalyst decision will send a chill through the development of rare diseases, and it will disproportionately affect children with rare diseases. It is essential that we continue to generate and spur the study of drugs in children. And so this decision will really go counter to that. As I said, the situation right now is that, and as you heard from Dr. Marks, the situation following that decision is that a sponsor could study a disease in a very narrow segment of the population, and then be able to block further approvals and throughout the entire condition that drug could address. So it is very concerning, and we appreciate Congress's interest and look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Dr. Shuren, I've long been concerned about our failure to protect consumers from harmful personal care products. As I noted during our last hearing, the FDA has extremely limited staff working to make sure that these products are safe despite the massive size of this industry. So, Dr. Shuren, yes or no, does the FDA have mandatory recall authority for personal care products?
Although that isn't my particular area, I would be happy to take that back to the agency and get you an answer on that.
All right. Is anyone able to answer that question at this point of our witnesses?
My understanding is they don't, but I would like to confirm that for you.
Okay.
I could try to chime in. So some of the over-the-counter products, such as, for instance, hand sanitizers, are regulated as drugs. And the answer is no. We unfortunately do not have a mandatory recall authority for drugs, with the exception of biologics, where that authority has existed for decades. And that includes over-the-counter products that are regulated as drugs. And what happened with the adulterated or contaminated hand sanitizer last year exemplifies the challenges of not having that mandatory recall authority for drugs. We had a situation where hand sanitizers imported from one particular country were contaminated with methanol, which is a poison. And we had several deaths. We were able to intervene, but we could have intervened much faster and much more effectively had FDA had a mandatory recall authority for drugs, including over-the-counter drugs.
And if you're able, can you describe some of the instances in which the agency has requested companies voluntarily recall their products?
That is a current process when it comes to drugs. We engage with the companies and we ask them to withdraw voluntarily. Some companies, good actors, will do it very quickly. However, some companies will take some time, and we have to engage in lengthy negotiations, often with dealing with law firms who have been engaged on the company's behalf. And that takes time, and the clock is ticking when a poison is out there and is either killing or making people blind, like the example that I gave you earlier.
Thank you.
Senator Collins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It only seems appropriate, given Senator Baldwin's questions, that I thank you, Madam Chair, and Senator Burr, the Vice Chair, for working so closely with me and Senator Feinstein on our personal products bill, which we've had for 2 Congresses now. And this is an area where there is a gap in regulation, and I hope that we will be able to fill it. But I do want to thank both of you and your staffs for working so closely with us. Dr. Cavazzoni, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services recently finalized a national coverage determination for monoclonal antibodies directed at the amyloid plaque for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease. Under the NCD, if these monoclonal antibodies received accelerated approval, Medicare will cover them only in FDA or NIH-approved trials. Now, Congress charged the FDA, not CMS, to be the agency responsible for evaluating the safety and efficacy of biomedical products. But CMS often makes coverage decisions on the basis of cost, an area where Congress has not empowered the FDA to weigh in. In this case, however, CMS routinely cites concerns about patient safety to justify their coverage determination, calling into question FDA's ability to evaluate this product class. So CMS is saying that in order to cover a drug that FDA has determined is safe for marketing, more safety data need to be generated. In light of the decision by CMS, do you question the FDA's decision-making regarding Aduhelm's accelerated approval.
Thank you, Senator. First, I would like to emphasize how committed we are to continue to utilize expedited pathways, including accelerated approval, to bring medicines to underserved populations, such as people suffering for Alzheimer's. And our decision on aducanumab exemplifies that commitment, and we stand by that decision. We believe that the data are solid and that the drug is appropriately made available to patients based on FDA's decision. It is important to distinguish FDA's role and CMS's role. So FDA is squarely and solely responsible for determining whether a drug is safe and effective. And we made that determination when we approved aducanumab, and that determination entailed our belief that, represented our belief that the drug can be made available to patients. Now, FDA does not have a role in making decisions about coverage. CMS works in tandem with FDA and have a different standard than the safe and effective standard, which is reasonable and necessary. And based on that standard, CMS have made decisions about coverage and reimbursement, which translate into the setting in which they will be covering the drug for their beneficiaries.
What concerns me in this case is not FDA's approach. I think you stayed within your lanes. Whether one agrees with the decision or not, you clearly stayed within your lane. But CMS did not, because CMS commented not just on the reasonableness and the cost, but on the safety. And my next question for you is, do you think that CMS getting outside of its lane and imposing additional restrictions will affect the number of pipeline products that may be reviewed through this pathway and may be of benefit to those suffering from Alzheimer's?
I'm not in a position to explain CMS's thinking. Having said so, when it comes to the pipeline, it is actually very robust. We have a lot of drugs in the pipeline for Alzheimer's disease, including drugs in the same class as aducanumab. It would be speculation to try to guess whether the decision might or might not impact future development. Having said so, what I can tell you is that the pipeline is very healthy, and we're very encouraged by the advances that are taking place in the fields of Alzheimer's and neuroscience in general.
And I guess what I would respond to that is CMS is so broad in its coverage decision on this that I fear it will discourage research and have an impact on the pipeline of drugs. I hope I'm wrong about that. My time has expired. Dr. Marks, I'm just going to submit for the record a question to you. I'm receiving complaints that CBER is responding to meeting requests with a written response only, which is not nearly as valuable as sitting down and talking with drug sponsors. So I'll submit that for the record, but I do think it's an issue.
Thank you. Senator Braun.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since I've been here in the Senate, I've been a disciple for fixing the whole healthcare system along with the regulatory agencies that feed into it. It's a classic example of huge corporations, I think, involved with a very, very large and clumsy government, and a lot of it's needed. Madam Chair refers to the gold standard of the FDA. Try explaining that to all of the rare disease victims out there and the families that have to contend with it. I've had a bill out there called the Promising Pathways Act that simply says acknowledge that it's a different dynamic when you've got maladies that have a prognosis of 2 to 4 years, 3 to 5 years if you're lucky. When we had the last hearing, I felt that there's not enough attention being paid to that. Do you think we've got the dynamism within the system that can differentiate between two different issues? Those that have been around for a long while, where there's maybe plenty of options, even though the industry does things like patent tweaking and so forth. And I'm doing this from the point of view of patients, employees, and business owners that don't own a healthcare company. So let's, Dr. Marks, tell me what you think about, do you feel comfortable with the agility and the framework that's currently in place to address the issues that I'm talking about?
So thank you for that question. So we have tremendous flexibility that Congress has granted us with use of our accelerated approval program. That allows us to use a variety of surrogate and intermediate endpoints. It allows us to look at products that have been studied in as few as 2 handfuls of patients and potentially approve a product if they meet the standard for safety and effectiveness. So I think we have a tremendous, essentially, canvas to work with. Sometimes I think we have to be more creative with how we go about that. Toward that end, we are working in our center towards trying to find ways to allow cell and gene therapies, particularly for very small populations, that is, perhaps 10, 20, 30 people in the United States who might be treated with these, to find their way into the marketplace more rapidly. There's some work that has to be done there, and some of those actually may interface with some potential legislation that's pending that has to do with essentially using platform technologies. But we do have a tremendous amount of flexibility here. We have approved products on the basis of even 8 patients' worth of data when those data are very sound.
Do you think we are using research and development from other countries that might be ahead of us? And again, I hear, well, that's done somewhere else. We need to still run it through the gold standard of our own FDA. We don't have the market cornered on all the best ideas. And if it's increasingly bureaucratic, and even though you say you have the ability to do this, should we be partnering up with other analogous agencies and efforts across the world?
So thank you. We're very open to looking at data that come from trials conducted overseas. I do agree with you that to the extent, particularly for rare disease patients, we need to try to work with colleagues globally to benefit patients as much as we can. We will continue to do so, and that actually has been an area of focus of the center, working actually with WHO and partners in Europe.
In building a successful business over the years, you do 2 things well. You size up the market and you listen to the customers. And in this case, I was disappointed in the last hearing, we weren't getting patient input. You learn more there at the grassroots level than you many times do in the ivory tower. And I think it would behoove your entity to pay attention to the patients, the people out there talking about it, living with it. And many of these innovations, these new cures, aren't coming from big pharma because they don't get the return on investment. And you may want to look at doing something that gives extra help to the smaller companies and the startups that maybe wouldn't measure it in the same way. Do you think that has merit?
Certainly it does, potentially. So very happy to continue to work with you on that.
Thank you so much.
Senator Marshall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question for Dr. Cavazzoni. Last week we received a letter from Commissioner Callip on FDA's changes to mifepristone risk evaluation mitigation strategies for medical termination of interuterine pregnancies up to 70 days of gestation. I want to submit for the record a study from the Health Services Research and Managerial Epidemiology. And basically it talks about chemical abortion increased ER visits by 500% from 2002 through 2015. As a OBGYN myself, certainly I was the doctor taking care of these complications, though I never would have ever considered prescribing this drug. Our big concern is this is now going to be done over the phone or through telemedicine. And based upon my clinical experiences, a woman's guessing of her gestational age is exactly that. It's a guess. And trying to make that determination even physically by putting your hands on that woman's uterus is off easily a month or two. Really, without an ultrasound, I'm very concerned about this drug being prescribed through telemedicine or over the phone. How can the FDA stand by its current policy knowing there's a direct correlation between ER visits and the chemical abortions, depending upon some other doctors to take care of the complications created by another physician or most likely a nurse practitioner or PA's doings? Do you think it's safe to mail these dangerous drugs, even potentially to underage women, without going through proper diagnostic protocols, including ultrasounds?
Thank you, Senator. Just to clarify some of the aspects of this, as part of litigation that FDA was involved in, we undertook a review of the mifepristone REMS, asking ourselves, is the REMS still necessary, and and are any modifications warranted to the REMS based on the data that are available? And under this exhaustive review of the data, which entailed data from our adverse event reporting system, data submitted from stakeholders, the litigants, and the sponsor, we concluded that the REMS has to stay in place. And the REMS entails a requirement for confirmation of gestational age. It is not prescriptive on how that is done. It leaves it up to a standard of care for the prescriber, but it does require confirmation of evaluation of gestational age. We also determined that as part of the REMS modification, the drug is safe and effective, and the benefit outweighs the risk. But if the in-person dispensing requirement is removed. Having said so, we also introduced a new requirement for pharmacies to be certified in order to be able to dispense the drug. And these are the safeguards that are in place right now, and we believe that those safeguards will ensure that the drug's benefit outweighs its risks.
Yeah, I could only wish the people prescribing these drugs were in the ER taking care of these patients at midnight and 2 in the morning and taking care and seeing the complications from the drugs themselves. And my guess is this will turn into a huge technology financial gig for certain companies. They will set this up to be very profitable, and many, many women are going to be harmed because of your decision. Dr. Marks, Senator Cassidy Smith and I championed the Ensuring Innovation Act, which prevents so-called evergreening, where brand-name drug makers make not-so-innovative modifications to active ingredients and get additionally exclusivity. I'm now hearing that brand-name drug makers are using slight modification in its inactive ingredients, as well as something as simple as changing the gauge so that the next biosimilar isn't interchangeable. Does FDA have the authority to recognize these loopholes and stop it?
So we do have the ability to take care of some of this. I'm going to pass this to Dr. Cavazzoni, who's handles most of these products.
So thank you for that question. Advancing the development of interchangeable biosimilars is a priority of the Padufa program. And the Padufa 3 commitment letter gives us additional tools that will allow us to put even more effort into this, including the issuance of very foundational guidances to guide developers on how to develop interchangeable interchangeable biosimilar, as well as a new regulatory science pilot program that is really geared towards identifying novel approaches in science to accelerate the development of interchangeable biosimilars. We are aware that there is some interest in Congress to also look at clarifying the parameters or the situation around exclusivity for biosimilars, to clarify that two biosimilars that are approved, the interchangeable biosimilars that are approved on the same day, would be able to share exclusivity, and we support any new tools that would allow us to continue to advance their development.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Over my time, I'll submit for the record a question about using bioprinting to replace animal models. Thank you.
Senator Hickenlooper.
I'm not sure is this on? Good enough. Thank you for your time and your service. This discussion, obviously, we've been in and out watching you on Zoom, and clearly the issues around how the FDA's approval, accelerated approval pathway has had great benefits in providing patients with serious and life-threatening diseases with timely access, but it's come under increased scrutiny. And I know you've discussed Aduhelm a little bit earlier, which it was approved against the recommendations of the Independent Advisory Committee, and the mismatch with the scientific recommendations could just as easily have gone the other way. You could have, let's say, the FDA did not approve a drug that otherwise got unanimous support from the Advisory Committee. So, Dr. Cavazzoni, why don't we turn to you and say, how can we enhance agency processes to promote at the very least transparency if FDA's decisions diverge from that of the Independent Advisory Committee?
Thank you, Senator. Before I address your question directly, I would like to clarify a couple of points. As we reviewed the data for aducanumab, we in fact took the input from the advisory committee into consideration. And we actually heard from the advisory committee that the data in the application did not support approving the drug using the traditional approval pathway. As we continue to review the data over the months that followed the advisory committee, and also became aware of additional data from other drugs that are developed in the same class, we concluded that the data in the application supported approving the drug using the accelerated approval pathway. And we're always very, very grateful for the input from our advisory committees, and we listen very carefully. Now, there are some areas when it comes to accelerated approval where we could use some help from Congress. We currently work with sponsors to make sure that they meet their commitments to conduct confirmatory trials, and that they do so within the time frame that we established at approval. Having said so, we don't have the authority to require that confirmatory trials be started or underway by the time the drug is approved, or if they're not started, that the sponsor provide a very detailed and plan to conduct those trials in a way that is feasible and that will meet the timelines and the milestones that we have established. Another area where we could use some help is in expediting the withdrawal of drugs when the confirmatory trials do not confirm that the drug is associated with clinical benefit. And right now, the expedited withdrawal path is anything but expedited. It will take up to years. It will require lots of resources and lots of administrative burden. And so we could use help in shoring up the very important accelerated approval tool that you have given us in those two areas.
Yeah, I can imagine that'd be very difficult, but I appreciate that. I was asking more about transparency. When you do have a different result than what the advisory committee says, right now it's not clearly stated why you diverge. You gave an explanation now, but that was not what came out then.
And thank you for clarifying, and my apologies for not addressing that point. We have a lot of information in our reviews, and if one looks at the review of aducanumab, for instance, there are hundreds and hundreds of pages that will lay out our rationale, our thinking about the data, and our rationale for approving the drug using accelerated approval. And certainly we welcome additional ways in which we can have more transparency in the space. For instance, we already have a website that lists all of the surrogate endpoints that have been used for accelerated approval and traditional approval.
Great, thank you. Dr. Marks, I was going to ask you about the how we can leverage the window of opportunity we have from this pandemic before what we know will be the next pandemic, to see if we can be better prepared, and was going to ask how we can help accelerate and encourage biomedical research on pathogens of pandemic level concern, so we're prepared for future threats. Maybe you can give a 30-second answer now, if that's okay with the chair, and then I'll submit this in writing. We get a more thorough answer.
So in 30 seconds, I think we have to leverage what we did best during this pandemic, which was to have very good active dialogue with those in the development stages of this, and to strengthen our manufacturing capabilities so that when we do have a new pathogen and we do develop something, we're able to manufacture it very rapidly.
Great. Well, so concise. I yield back to the chair.
Thank you. Senator Burr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One question and a few comments. Peter, I can't let you, excuse me, Dr. Shuren, I can't let you get out, Jeff, without talking about TAP. You and I sort of look at the same room from two different windows. As you know, I'm not too excited about it. But let me ask the question in this way. What performance goals do you want us to put in the statute?
I think what's in the commitment letter is the right place to start. And we'll learn from the pilot what's the best way to make this work optimally. And from there, we'll also be well informed about what additional metrics go in. I'll tell you quite frankly, I'd like to see us shorten the time from when you go from concept. It's really the development phase, that valley of death. You know, as you said before, we get so focused on pre-market review, but the most important time is everything that leads up to that moment, because if you do that right, pre-market review should be a coronation. And TAP is about addressing the development side of the house. I'd love to shrink that. Today, it's hard to get the data to really know what real time is involved there and how to compare apples to apples for different kinds of technology. But that's what I'd love to see down the road. We're not ready for it today.
When you leave, I hope you'll think about this a little bit, because I'm giving you the opportunity to tell us what tools we should use to measure the success of a pilot program. I want to stress a pilot program. Right now, I'm not sure that there's metrics or guardrails or goals that give us something to measure. And I don't want you to fall into a situation where 3 years from now you're coming back and say, we've got to permanently put this in, and you've got members who are going, how do we know? Do we just take your word for it that it's been successful? I mean, we've got accelerated pathways out there, as you know. I think the authority, the opportunities already exist for everything you're trying to design in TAP. So I think you can do them today, but think about it. Tell us what you'd like to have in statute versus leave it up to me, because there'll be something in there that I think will allow members to gauge it in the future. I'd rather you be the author of it. Peter, I just want to comment on one thing you said. Global collaboration. I agree with you. It is robust. It's getting better. But I want to remind you that global collaboration and acceptance of foreign data are two different things. And the authority has existed at FDA since 1997 when I did the FDAMA bill, but we really didn't accept foreign data until COVID. And my hope is that that's one of those reflection points that we will look going forward at how we use more foreign data in substantiation of the applications versus to roll this back. I think you guys deserve a tremendous amount of credit going through 2.5 years of hell, every center, and the overall FDA, and how you've handled it, how you've taken advantage of the authorities that we presented that none of us ever knew whether we would ever need, but we needed every one of them that were out there, and the chair and I are trying to comb through to figure out how we be visionary, how visionary we can be in redesigning this for things that might be needed in the future for all of you. I just can't thank you enough for the performance of the individuals that work in each of your centers, because I know they have put in long hours over a protracted period of time. And unfortunately, I don't see yet an end point to this. I see light at the tunnel. I just don't know whether it's a train or the sun. But just understand, we're in this with you together. And Dr. Cavazzoni, I just want to commend you. You've been criticized greatly for making a decision to approve using endpoints, surrogate endpoints for Aduhelm. I think it's the right thing to do. I think the point that Senator Collins was trying to make is that when we have innovation like that in an area that everybody's out trying to find something that helps Alzheimer's patients and other disease categories that are out there, and we do an approval at FDA, and CMS then limits the people who it would be applicable to, even as severely as what they just did, they have just crushed the capital markets that financed the development of that drug. And this is sort of my last opportunity to say to you guys, what the capital markets, how they look at what you do and the products that come out is absolutely crucial to our success in this country. If, in fact, they're not shareholders that are going to invest in these companies, if there's not private capital that's chasing that two-person innovation bench, Peter, trying to get that next technology out, whether it's mRNA or something else, if they don't see when you approve those technologies that you don't have to go back through approval when it's used for a new indication, just the clinical trials for the new indication, those are the messages we send out there to fuel more of this innovation and growth into the market. Now, we've had a great success, I believe, and we've got another agency of the federal government that just absolutely cut our legs out from under us. And I would tell you it is going to be devastating. If you look at biotechnology and you look at how much investment's going into the field right now, it's at one of the lowest points that we've seen since it's been tracked. And it's cut in half from where it was pre-pandemic. Don't know the reason, but I can assure you that if we want the capital to flow for these innovative new technologies that may have that key that unlocks the door to this cancer cure or HIV/AIDS or something else, we've got to fuel those research benches. It's not going to be discovered internally within government. It's going to be some promising person, just like we got that's the advantage of getting old, you forget words. But we had a breakthrough with one particular scientist who I can't come up with it. But it's a whole new category of cancer treatment today. You know what I'm talking about. And had we not financed that from NIH, we wouldn't have that fourth or fifth, I can't remember, treatment pathway that we've got, all because of one guy. And you know, we can't look out and say, here's the one. So we got to place bets across the board, and they've got to have financing to be able to get Jeff, to where you talked about the valley of death, and then we've got to figure out how to get them through it. So, Madam Chairman, thank you. I look forward to going forward on the committee's work. Once again, I thank all of you for the job that you do, and more importantly, the people that are behind you at the agency. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Burr. Dr. Cavazzoni, just for the record, FDA has confirmed the safety and effectiveness of mifepristone, which FDA approved, I believe, over 20 years ago. Is that correct?
That is correct. And my apologies. After our review of the REMS and taking into consideration the modifications that we made, we conclude that the benefits outweigh the risk and the drug is safe and effective.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. Dr. Shuren, for years I've called on FDA to improve surveillance of medical devices to protect patients from infection and other dangers. Actually, 7 years ago, I asked my committee staff to investigate a series of dangerous infections in my home state of Washington linked to contaminated medical devices, and we found at least 25 different outbreaks of antibiotic-resistant infections connected to the device that sickened over 250 patients worldwide. FDA has to have the tools and resources it needs to ensure the safety of medical devices. How does the user fee agreement help enhance FDA monitoring of medical devices that are on the market?
Well, currently, the scope of Padufa does not include post-market surveillance. It certainly was a topic that we had raised and discussed in negotiations. We did feel it was important to reach accord with industry, have a consensus agreement. I know there were differences of opinion here that maybe it would be better to fund it through appropriations. That said, I think the agreement we have is still a strong one and ultimately does help for patients in assuring timely access to safe and effective devices. I think it supports more of our work under the Safer Technologies program, so at least it tackles a side of the equation about having safer devices on the market, but it does not currently cover, once those devices are on the marketplace, continued monitoring and surveillance.
So post-market surveillance is not covered?
Is not currently covered.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. That will end our hearing today, and I want to thank all of our colleagues for their participation and our witnesses, Dr. Cavazzoni, Marks, and Shuren. Thank you for joining us today and answering our questions. For any senators who wish to ask additional questions, questions for the record will be due in 10 business days. May 10th at 5 p.m., the Subcommittee on Employment and Workplace Safety will meet next week on May 3rd at 10 a.m. in Dirksen 430 for a hearing on connecting workers and communities, preparing and supporting the broadband workforce. With that, the committee stands adjourned.